Alright, welcome back everyone. Today we're going to be kicking off my deck building mini-series on Feather the Redeemed. I've broken this series into two parts. There is a lot to talk about with this commander. So first up in today's video, we're going to be looking at a Boros good stuff build, because I think people are getting a little too carried away with Feather combo pieces and draw spells and things like that. So I want to remind everyone that balance is important. We'll also be looking at a Boros ETB deck with Feather, which I'm really excited about. In the second part of this series, we will be looking at a more combo-based version of Feather, things like Aetherflux Reservoir, Paradox Engine, that sort of stuff. And we'll also be looking at the Voltron Pump build, which I think a lot of people are excited about. And also, in the second part of the series, I will be going through exactly how I made cuts to the deck, so that will be a longer video. But if you want to learn a lot about how to cut cards from a commander deck, I highly recommend checking that one out, and I expect that that'll be out within 24 hours of this video. Because this series is going to be a bit longer, I am going to timestamp everything, so if you want to skip around to certain topics, feel free to check out the timestamps in the description. But with that, let's get into the first build. Alright, welcome back everyone. Today we are trying to do some deck building with Feather the Redeemed. Notably, Feather is not available on Magic Online yet, so you will see Aurelia Exemplar sitting in the command zone, just so that we can get the proper colors for our deck while building here, so pay no attention to this. This will actually become Feather once she's released online. Now, before we get into that, I will say, I have not played this commander yet. Once the commander's released, and once I've had a chance to play it a few times, my thoughts on what the deck wants to be doing may change, and what things are needed in the deck. So this is all from a before actually playing it standpoint. So just keep in mind that over time things will change and the meta may shift, the deck will evolve, people will figure out better ways to build it. So this is really going to be a lot of like first take, day one kind of attempts at building Feather the Redeemed. The purpose of this deck is just to be a Boros good stuff kind of deck. We want some synergies with Feather, but we also want other good cards in the deck in case Feather gets blown up. And I do really like the concept of a balanced build where you're not all in on your commander. If your commander dies, you can still do things, you can still win the game without your commander being in play. So first up, you'll notice that I'm at 108 cards currently. I still need to make a bunch of cuts. I won't lie to you guys, Feather is going to be difficult. There are a lot of cards that synergize well with her, and paring down exactly to which ones are the best is going to take some trial and error. You're going to have to play the deck a bit, figure out what you need, what you don't need, how many synergy cards you actually want versus just regular good stuff kind of cards. That's going to be something to think about as well. Like there's a lot of these cards like Expedite and Crimson Wisps. The question is, how many of those do we actually need in the deck? I don't know. Something I'm just going to have to feel out over time. But anyway, I'm going to keep working at this build. I'm going to try to pare this down to 100, and then we'll see what things are looking like once we get down to 100 cards. So about 30 minutes later, I finally got this cut down to 100 cards. You'll see over here that I have Chandra Torch of Defiance, just kind of as a sideboard option. I really wanted to get into the deck. I think it's going to fit beautifully into the curve. Based on what Feather can do, 3/4 flyer for 3 mana, you get that down nice and early. That's going to stop tokens and small creatures from swinging your way, which I think is going to make it really easy to get Chandra in and just start using that plus mode to get some extra mana going. Or if you want to use the Exile ability as well, also really good. So I really wanted it in there, but I had to cut something, so I cut that, but something you can strongly consider if you are building this deck. But let's take a look at the main deck here. So first up, you'll notice a ton of mana ramp, and this deck is mana hungry. I was talking to someone at the shop last night who's been working on their own version of the deck. They were trying to build a stacks version to face some of the really competitive stuff. You know, for them, they were really concerned about... For them, the difference between 1 mana and 2 mana is really big in their meta. So, you know, they're trying to go pretty hard with it. And they were still trying to fuddle their way around it. Anyway, the one thing that we both agreed on is that this deck is going to be tight on mana. Playing those spells every turn does eat up mana, and it is going to be awkward in the early and mid game. So we have a ton of mana ramp. I did prioritize cards that make colored mana. I cut Thran Dynamo from this list, which is, I'd run that card in every single deck because it is ridiculous. Thran Dynamo is on par with the power level of Soul Ring and Mana Crypt. It comes down a little bit later, but over the course of about 7 or 8 turns, it will produce about the same amount of mana as these 2 mana rocks. So lots and lots of mana ramp in this deck. We want to be able to cast our spells. We want to be able to cast them often. Not too much else to say on that. And like I said, colored mana is going to be very important in this deck. Wait till we get to the land section. When we talk about lands, I'm actually going to be making a bunch of changes right there, and I'll kind of walk you through it about what I'm thinking of how this deck should make use of its lands. But moving over to the second pile here, these are Syngery cards with Feather. These are the cards that you wouldn't necessarily find me running in my standard Boros builds. These are cards specifically designed to interact with Feather and her abilities. We do have a couple cards in the deck that give our creatures indestructible in the form of Johnny's Presence, Dawn Charm. Shelter gives protection, Dawn Charm gives regenerate, Eerie Interlude gives bounce until end of turn, which is really good. We also have Boros Charm in the deck. I consider that just part of the main Boros stuff because I run that in just about every deck anyway. But we have a number of ways to give our stuff indestructible, which is great. Right now I'm running 1, 2, 3, 4 standard board wipes, plus Fell the Mighty and Chandra's Ignition, which are both conditional board wipes. So giving our creatures indestructible going to be a pretty good idea. Also stops opponents' board wipes, just makes it difficult to interact. So that was something I wanted to focus on. Then we have kind of these cantrippy things with Expedite. Haste is nice, especially if you're putting it on like a Sun Titan, something like that. Impact Resonance I think is going to be really good. I've messed around with this card a little bit. When I can get it to work, you can't always get it to work the way you want it to, but I think it should be very good in this deck. When you do get it to work, very powerful. Obviously Monastery Mentor and Young Pyromancer, because those should just be ridiculous in this deck. Aurelia's Fury is just another auto-include. Some of the more interesting ones are Balefire Liege and Gutter Snipe, because whenever we cast, we can do damage to our opponents without actually having to attack, which is an important thing sometimes. If opponents pillow fort it up, or they have a ton of blockers, or whatever the case is, being able to get damage through without attacking can be really important, so I do like that. But obviously, a lot of powerful cards in here. While sifting through the cards that were available, these are the ones that I thought were going to fit this particular build the best. It's a lot of protection, bit of utility with things like Dawn Charm. I wanted to get Valorous Stance in here as well, but just ran out of deck slots. Valorous Stance is a really cool utility card. One that I've used in the past a little bit, haven't used much lately, but it's always been kind of in the back of my mind as something that I'd like to have around a bit more. And then after that, we get into our standard Boros good stuff. Dowsing Dagger is a card that I really like for this deck. Because your commander has flying and it costs 3 mana if you get it down on turn 3, which won't happen every time, by the way. If you're running colorless mana, that won't be a 100% of the time kind of thing. But either way, it should still be easy enough to get a shot in with this Dowsing Dagger and get the land flipped over. And that gives you a lot of extra mana. Just be careful with this card if there's a lot of Strip Mines, Ghost Quarters, Tectonic Edges in your meta. Lost Veil is a huge target for land destruction. So then right here, a bunch of cards that you guys have seen me play in every single Boros deck. Probably don't need to talk about those very much. Mask of Memory is one that I think will also be really good. Mask of Memory on 2, Commander on 3, Equip and Attack on 4. You still have theoretically 3 open mana to do whatever else you want, or, you know, whatever combination of early attack, draw some extra cards. Should be really good. Moving on, the base of this deck was actually copied over from my Aurelia Exemplar list. So I think Feather and Aurelia Exemplar have a lot of similarities just in how they behave as a creature. So things that I think will be good with Aurelia Exemplar will also be good with Feather. And that's going to be stuff like Bastion Protector, giving it some additional power and indestructible, Duelist Heritage for the double strike. You want to be able to close the game out relatively quickly. And by quickly, I mean like by turn 8 or by turn 9. After that, you start getting into a place where the big mana decks can really do a lot of damage. So, you know, you don't want the game to go too long. Duelist Heritage helps you close things out. Silverblade Paladin, also more double strike. We are running the Aggravated Assault, Sword of Feast and Famine, Neheb combo. So Neheb can get us some extra mana. Sword of Feast and Famine can get us some extra mana. Both cards really good on their own. And if we're looking for a way to close the game out, Aggravated Assault gives us infinite combat steps. So that is one way to finish the game. So with this balance build in particular, like I've said, we're not going all in on Feather. So we need other ways to close the game out. And this is just a really good option in Boros that, you know, you can jam into almost every deck because it's good. It's just very good. Continuing on the double strike, we do have some double strike in Bruce Tarl. Hammer of Nazan for more indestructible, good for the board wipes. And another way to close the game out, we are running the Helm of the Host combo. We do have both Aurelia and Godo. Another way to close the game out. So again, a lot of cards you guys have seen me play over and over again. I probably already over-explained them a bit, but that's okay. Sun Titan, really good. Cloud Shift is a card that you can run in this deck. I'm not running it in this particular list, but will be in some other ones. If you have Feather out and you Cloud Shift on a Sun Titan, good things are going to happen. And then we have our two big finishers in Elish Norn and Gisela. Elish Norn just good all the time. Hurts your opponents really bad. Some commanders, some decks can't operate when Elish Norn is in play. If we have our token producers out, our token producers are going to spit out some pretty big creatures. Gisela just good all the time, does lots of crazy stuff. And another board wipe at the top right there. So now I'm going to reorganize the deck by converted mana cost. So again, these are all my synergy pieces with Feather, and those will get sorted back into the converted mana cost. You can see how the converted mana cost balances out. So the mana costs aren't perfectly balanced in this list, but this is still a pretty good balance of where I think this deck wants to be. You'll notice not too much stuff up here at the top. Oh, by the way, we do have Onward to Victory. I'm going to put that in the 3 mana slot, and I'm going to put Leave to Chance in the 2 mana slot, because the way that we'll actually be using those, they'll fit better into those converted mana cost slots. So, which means that technically Sunforger is going to be an 8-drop, so we'll put that way up there with that thing. Blasphemous Act is 9, but also makes Sword of Feast and Famine a 5-drop. That's not the type of card you want to just like play and hope to untap with. I mean, sometimes that works, but if there's removal at your table, Feast and Famine will eat a fair share of removal. So that actually looks really good in terms of balanced converted mana cost. So 12 1-drops, 13 2 and 3 drops, and then we have 7 4-drops, 7 5-drops, and significantly less of things that cost more than that. So you'll notice this nice tapering action. Lots of things to do early and mid-game, and, you know, a couple heavy hitters at the top, but we don't want to go too crazy with making our mana curve super bloated. Now, one thing to consider is that we do have 12 pieces of mana ramp in the deck, so maybe we do want to go a little bit bigger than we are currently. That being the case, that is an easy problem to fix. If I do feel like we're having lots of mana and nothing to do with it, then a Maria Shepherd is probably coming in for me. Great way to get some things back. Charmbreaker Devils might be a cute little inclusion. Get some of our spells back if for some reason they end up in the graveyard and don't get used by the Feather ability. Inferno Titan is always just a great card to have around. So always lots of things to do if you need to add bigger stuff to the deck. Thalia's Lancer is probably not the worst thing I've ever seen either. So lots of good things we can do there, but let's move on to the lands. Now, I know talking about lands is not sexy, but I think with this deck, it's going to be more important than it is with a lot of other decks that you build, and especially Boros decks. So again, this list was copied over from my Aurelia Exemplar. We'll see a lot of lands that were good in Aurelia Exemplar that I don't think are going to fit the same way in this deck. We're trying to hit 3 colored mana. We're trying to hit red, white, white on turn 3. Which is not the easiest thing. I've got an Ancient Tomb in here. Ancient Tomb is a good card, but if you wanted to take it out of this particular deck, I would not fault you for doing so. Now, it can still do other cool explosive things. It can get your Burnished Hearts and your Solemn Simulacrums down faster, and that's a good place to be. So plenty of reasons to keep it in, but like I said, yeah, if you wanted to take it out, I would not fault anyone for wanting to do that. We have some fetched lands, no biggie there. Buried Ruin? We can live without Buried Ruin, I think. Cathedral of War, definitely not. That one's very specific to Aurelia Exemplar. Command Tower, obviously, is staying. Hall of the Bandit Lord, that one's pretty specific to Aurelia Exemplar, and not a card that I don't love. It's a lot of life loss. Hainware Battlements. I mean, I really like Hainware Battlements, but colorless mana. It's a thing. We're going to leave that one for now, and we may come back to it. At the end, I'm going to take a little tally of how many colorless producing lands I have and then adjust from there. I'd really like to keep the Hainware Battlements in, but I mean, it may need to get cut. We'll see what happens. Homeward Path, also going to be in that category. When you need Homeward Path is really good. Getting your stuff stolen, very, very bad. Myriad Landscape, I'm going to cut. It's a good card, but it is slow. Sometimes you go, 8, 9, 10 turns into the game before you can actually crack it. If you have a lot to be doing in the early and mid game, which I think this deck does. So I don't think it's going to be a fit in this deck. Then we have our basics right here. Reliquary Tower, I'm going to cut. More so than other Boros decks, this deck can draw with all the cantrippy kind of cards. I need to see exactly how effective that's going to be and how often we're going over 7 mana. If we do need access to no maximum hand size, I might look at a Library of Leng or Thought Vessel. We'll see. But I really want to keep most of our lands producing colored mana if we can. Slayer Stronghold, definitely out. Even in a lot of other Boros decks, I don't run this one that much. I find that 3 mana to give a creature haste is significantly worse than 2 mana to give a creature haste. Now, if you've been attacking with Aurelia and like Sword of the Animus for a while, it may not be that big of a deal, but it's been awkward for me in the past. I don't run it nearly as much anymore. Okay, so then we've got Strip Mine and Sunhome. Though both of those are definitely staying. Those are just all-stars at what they do. If you feel like you need a lot of land destruction, Tectonic Edge is usually the next thing that I go for. But because we're trying to minimize all the colorless producing lands, we're going to skip that one for now. And one way to get around that may actually be a card that I really like is Volcanic Offering. Destroy target non-basic land you don't control and target non-basic land of an opponent's choice you don't control. So 2 non-basic lands that you don't control, and 7 damage target creature you don't control, 7 damage target creature of an opponent's choice you don't control. And I actually really like this because this can blow up a key land of your opponent's without you having to sacrifice one of your own lands. Because if you sacrifice a Strip Mine early in the game, on like turn 4 or something, then your opponents are going up, on their next turn they're at 5 mana and you might only be at 4. You fall behind. Volcanic Offering is a nice way to take down some important creatures and get rid of some problematic lands without having to sacrifice your own lands. Honestly, it should probably be in this deck. I would actually like to see more removal in this deck overall. Once we figure out what cards don't need to be in the deck, then Volcanic Offering is probably something that I'm bringing in. I really like the utility that this thing provides. But anyway, we cut 6 lands out of the deck. We've got Haywire Battlements, Homeward Path, Ancient Tomb, and Strip Mine and Sunhome. That's 5 colorless producing lands. I think I'm okay with that. I think that's about right. I feel like those are the ones we really, really need, at least for what my meta typically entails, for things that I'm expecting to run into. So yeah, I think maybe 5, 6, maybe 7 colorless producing lands is probably all right, but I definitely wouldn't go more than that. I feel pretty good about where we're at right now. The card I'm actually going to add back in is Flamekin Village. And you guys saw that Hall of the Bandit Lord earlier. I like Flamekin Village significantly more than I like Hall of the Bandit Lord. It's a lot like Haywire Battlements, just that it comes into play tapped if you don't reveal an elemental card. For me, coming in tapped is just significantly better than having to pay 3 life and coming in tapped off the Hall of the Bandit Lord and not producing mana. Flamekin Village, by the way, does produce red mana, so that's why we're going with it here. It's not in this particular deck, but occasionally you'll have Taurine Mauler or something like that. That is every creature type, and that does give you a nice way to... you can get that land into play untapped occasionally, which is cool. So bring in some lands. Actually, not run. I didn't have Battlefield Forge in that list, ironically. We'll get an Inspiring Vantage. Ooh, this deck is really skimping on mountains. Probably just going to add a couple mountains in. There's a bit more red in this deck than some of my other Boros lists. A lot of my Boros lists, I can really get away with like 5 or 6 mountains because I'm using a ton of fetches. So that puts us back up to like 6 or 7 mountains. Take a little look at our plains count. Looks like we have 10 total planes, 7 which are basics, 3 are non-basics. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, Sunforger is obviously in our deck. It's so good that I didn't even feel like I needed to talk about it, but yeah, Sunforger can tutor like, I don't know, 20 or 30 cards out of the deck, so obviously going to be super good. The price in paper spiked pretty hard when Feather was released. I expect that it'll probably settle back down around $3 or $4, but I don't know exactly how long that'll take. It does have 3 printings, so I don't think the price is going to stay high forever, but so I hope you picked up your copies before that. But yeah, just an insane card, and you can really customize your Sunforger package to what's going on in your meta. I won't go into that today. That's an entirely separate video because there are so many options available to it. But yeah, Sunforger grabbing just about all the things you need out of your deck going to be really, really good. And like you guys saw, I did put this thing in the 8 converted mana cost slot. You do want to treat this as an 8 drop where you can cast it, equip it, and leave up 2 mana all in the same turn. You don't want to cast it with 3 mana, leave it there, and hope that it doesn't get blown up. So make sure you play Sunforger like you would play an 8 drop. So this is going to finish up build number 1 of Feather, and this is kind of my Boros Good Stuff balance build. We have some standard Boros finishers with Aurelia, Gisela, the combos, things like that. A lot of double strike. We can do some things with Feather, but Feather is not the only tool available to us, so could be a nice thing if there's some removal flying around your meta and you're not expecting your commander to stick around all that long. This may be one particular build to look at, and definitely something we'll try out on the channel once it is available. But with that, let's move on to the next build. All right, 60 minutes later, we are back with build number 2 of Feather the Redeemed. So this is the ETB build. This is a build that I'm really excited about. So I know everyone has at least partially thought about, the very obvious heroic build, which I think is still very cool and something we will talk about. But the build that I'm excited about is this ETB. Here's what I want you guys to envision. Cloud Shift on a Sun Titan, repeat. You can get so many lands doing that. Like, if you do that for a couple turns, I mean, you're going to be at 10 lands on turn 6. Yeah, the ability to repeatedly cloud shift an ETB creature just seems insane. So we've loaded this deck list up with ETB creatures. We'll take a quick look at those. By the way, we're also using things like Liberate, Long Road Home, Otherworldly Journey, Acrobatic Maneuver, and Eerie Interlude, all cards that do some form of blinking and target our creature so that we can get it back as long as Feather's in play. So, starting early in the curve, Stoneforge Mystic, awesome card, Wall of Omens, some card draw, War Priest of Thune, that's removal for enchantments. Knight of the White Orchid is ramp. Now, really important, in a deck like this, you want to hit Knight of the White Orchid, Solemn Simulacrum, or Core Cartographer really early. Those are one of the main things that you want to find. That's how you're going to get your mana ramp going, and decks like this can take a little bit of mana to work, so finding one of those three is going to be very important. Because of that, we are running both Recruiters in the deck. We have Imperial Recruiter and Recruiter of the Guard. I counted about 15 targets for each, give or take. So there are plenty of things in the deck that we can get. As the game wears on, we can go grab something like a Kiki Jiki, and Kiki Jiki is just a wacky card. You can do some crazy stuff. So lots of good things to hit with those. We can also grab our Monastery Mentor and our Young Pyromancer if we want to go more of the Feather combo route and start building up tokens and playing that kind of game. Moving up the curve a little bit, we have Flametongue Kavu, removal for creatures, Thalia's Lancers, find some of our big stuff, which I always really like, Karmic Guide, get our things back. Angel of Invention is a really cool card, so I played this in my Elish Norn ETB deck, and one, this is a tutor target for both of the recruiters. Because its power toughness is actually 2-1, you can make it bigger if you want to, but you can also make the tokens, and it pumps your creatures, and it has lifelink, and it has vigilance. This card does so much. This card is so good in an ETB deck. And, you know, with the Fabricate, you can choose which mode you need more at that particular point in time. So just a lot of cool things to do there. Like if you have Path to Exile, in your hand, then obviously go for the tokens and start shooting your tokens and getting lands into play. A lot of weird ways to ramp with Feather, and in this deck especially with the ETB stuff. And then the stuff that I'm really excited about, this is really where we want to be. Captain of the Watch, we ETB that. That's going to give us tons and tons of soldier tokens. Sun Titan, do all kinds of wacky recursion stuff, get lands, get swords, get creatures back. Godo is going to find all the equipments in the deck. We do have Helm of the Host. Helm of the Host also works great with ETBs. We have Blade of Selves. Again, another card that works great with ETBs. We can get Swiftfoot Boots if we want to give it haste, and also sort of Feast and Famine and Sunforger as other great equipment options. So lots of good things to do with Godo right there. Aurelia the War Leader. Aurelia the War Leader is an interesting one. So it's not an ETB, but if you declare attacks with her, the trigger goes on the stack and then you blink her, she'll actually come back in again and you'll get to attack again. So you'll get additional combats that way. In addition to just being one of the best Boros cards out there, cards like Cloud Shift do work favorably with Aurelia. So that's another thing that we can possibly do. Elish Norn, because we're Elish Norn, 1, because it's awesome, and 2, because we are playing a bunch of small 2/2 creatures. Elish Norn will make them big enough to do meaningful amounts of damage, and again, minusing our opponent's creatures, really important. Angel of Serenity has a lot of utility in that it can remove opponent's creatures, or you can get back things from your graveyard if you need to. So lots of fun things to do there. And Gisela, just always good to have. So this is the ETB version of the deck. So I've been trying to make a Boros ETB deck work for quite a while. I've attempted a few different commanders with it. The last one I tried was Archangel Avacyn. It's a game that I filmed but haven't shown yet. We'll probably save that one for a rainy day. But I think Feather is going to be hands down the best Boros ETB deck because of the ability to just constantly reuse Cloud Shift, Liberate, Long Road Home, those type of cards. Really, really good. I mean, basically you only need to find one of these to get going. Once you find one of them, as long as nothing happens like removal or counter spells, you can just keep blinking your best card in play over and over again, and it should get out of hand really quickly. Other things to note with this deck, because we need to hit so many creatures in the deck, we really want about 25. We got 24. So that does not leave a lot of room for other stuff. We have a little bit of removal. We have a lot of mana ramp, a little bit less than the last build. But the deck slots to get all these creatures and to get all of the blink spells in the deck had to come from somewhere. So in this particular build, we don't get to use a lot of the more dirtily draw card type of spells with Feather. Basically, I've just gone for Expedite and Crimson Wisps because I like having haste. Also because they are cheap mana-wise. But I don't know, maybe one of those should be one of the protection cards that also cantrips. We'll see how this deck plays. But yeah, this is another one that I'm really excited about. Not too much to think about here. It's an ETB deck. We see things like Conjurer's Closet, Panharmonicon. No Flame Shadow Conjuring. I find that holding the mana up for that one can be awkward. But yeah, this is another little build that I'm excited about. Basically the plan is blink your creatures like crazy, generate tons of value. Once you have some things in play, slam an Elshnorn, slam an Inferno Titan, bounce it, and then attack away, burn things out, attack again with Aurelia, that sort of stuff. And again, we do have the Godo Helm of the Host combo, so we can attack infinitely if we need to. So lots of fun little things in this deck, and this is probably the build that I'm most excited about. I think it'll be the most fun, and I've been trying to make a build like this work for a while. I think this one will actually be pretty effective, so really excited about this. Talk about the lands a little bit more. I know we talked about it on the last build a little bit, but one thing I forgot to mention. So we went through a lot of the changes to the lands, minimal colorless lands in this deck. We want a lot of colored lands. I wouldn't be afraid to run a lot of basics in this deck. I also wouldn't be afraid to run the red-white tap lands. Any of the red-white tap lands if you don't have tons and tons of fetch lands at your disposal. So if you're on a bit of a budget, things like Terramorphic Expanse, Windscarred Crag is the one that gains you life, I think. Stone Quarry, cards like that. I would run a good handful of those. Maybe an Ash Barrens, stuff like that. I'm more okay with your lands coming in tapped than I am with them producing colorless mana for this particular deck. In other decks that would probably be flip-flop, but in this deck I really want to prioritize making colored mana. So yeah, don't be afraid of lands that come into play tapped if you're on a budget and you need to hit your colored mana. One thing I would like to see with this deck, I would like to see just a little bit more removal. I feel like I'm running just a little bit removal light on this particular build. So if we can find some cards to take out after playtesting this a little bit, that would be something I would look to add in. So I hope you guys enjoyed this look at Feather today. Be sure to check out part 2 where I talk about the combo build and the Voltron Pump build, as well as how I actually go about cutting cards from the deck. And of course, videos like this are possible because of my awesome Patreon supporters. So if you want to help support the channel and vote on which decks I play next, feel free to check out my Patreon at the link below.